Chapter 8. Mary is presented in the temple. August 30th, 1944. I see Mary between her father and mother walking in the streets of Jerusalem. Passers-by stop and gaze in wonder at this beautiful little girl who is all dressed in white and is wearing a very light, bright mantle. And this mantle, because of its floral design, composed of intertwining branches and flowers, which are a little darker than the soft background they rest upon, seems to be the same one that Anne was wearing on the day of her purification. The only difference is that, while it reached down to Anne's waist, in the case of Mary, who is only a little girl, it falls down to her ankles and envelops her in a small light and bright cloud of rare beauty. Her fair hair, loose on her shoulders, or rather on her gentle neck, shines through her veil, which is simple and elegant. It's free of any pattern and shows forth only a plain, very light background. This veil is held on her forehead by a very pale blue ribbon, on which small lilies are embroidered with silver threads, certainly the careful work of her loving mother. As I said, her snow-white dress reaches down to the ground, and her little feet can only just be seen as she walks in her white sandals. Her hands are like two magnolia petals peeping out from the long sleeves. Apart from the blue ribbon, there is no other color. She is all in white, a white so pure and bright that she seems to be dressed in glimmering snow. Joachim is also wearing the same garment he had on for the purification, but Anne instead is wearing a very dark violet dress. Her mantle too, which also covers her head, is dark violet. She's holding it carefully, lowered below her eyes. Two poor mother's eyes, reddened with tears, that do not wish to weep, and above all do not wish to be seen crying, but cannot help but shed tears under the protection of the mantle, a protection that serves its purpose with regard to passers-by and also with regards to Joachim, whose eyes, usually clear, are today also red and dull because of the tears he has shed and is still steadily shedding. He's walking with a stoop. His head is covered by a veil worn in the fashion of a turban, with the folds hanging down along his face. This today is a very old Joachim. All who see him must think that he is the grandfather or even the great-grandfather of the little girl he's holding by the hand. The pain of losing her causes this poor father to drag his feet, and he is so weary that he looks at least 20 years older. He's so sad and tired that he looks elderly and ill. His mouth trembles slightly between the two wrinkles that, on either side of his nose, are especially deep today. Both Joachim and Anne are fighting to conceal their tears. But if they are successful with many in the crowds who surround them, they are not so with Mary, who, because of her height, sees them from below, and lifting her head looks at her father and mother in turn. They both make an effort to smile at her with their trembling mouths, and they hold her tiny hands tighter every time their precious little daughter looks at them and smiles. They must be thinking, "There, her smile to be seen one less time." They proceed slowly, so very slowly. They seem to be wishing to prolong their journey for as long as possible. Everything serves as a pretext to stop. But every journey must come to an end, and this one now is about to end. Up there, at the top of this last stretch of road, there are the temple walls. Anne utters a groan and holds Mary's hand tighter. "Anne, my dear, I am here with you," a voice utters, coming out from the shade of a low arch built over a crossroads. And Elizabeth, who was waiting for them, approaches her and embraces her. And since Anne is crying, she says, "Oh, my dear, come into this friendly house for a little while. Then we shall all go together. Zacharias is here too." They all enter a low, dark room where the only light comes from a big fire. The landlady, obviously a friend of Elizabeth's, but unknown to Anne, kindly withdraws and leaves them alone. "You must not think that I am repenting, or that I am giving my treasure to the Lord unwillingly," Anne tries to explain amid her tears. "But it's my heart. Oh, how my heart aches! My old heart that is returning to its childless solitude. If you could only feel the pain that—" "I know, my dear Anne, I know. But you are good, and God will console you in your solitude, you and Joachim. And Mary will pray for the peace of her mother. Won't you, Mary?" Mary squeezes her mother's hands and kisses them. She presses them to her face, wanting to be felt and wanting to feel their gentle warmth. And Anne holds her little face tightly in her hands and kisses her repeatedly. Her cheeks, her chin, her nose, her eyes, her beautiful smooth forehead. Anne could never grow tired of kissing her. Zacharias enters the room and greets them, saying, "May the peace of the Lord be with the just." "Yes," replies Joachim, "do implore peace for us, because our hearts are trembling within us as we now come to make our offering, to fulfill our vow, as Abraham's did while he was climbing the mountain, this holy mountain. But we shall not find another offering to replace this one, as he did. And neither do we want it, because we are faithful to the Lord. But we are suffering, Zacharias. Since you are a priest of God, please understand us, and do not be offended or upset. Never, never. On the contrary, your sorrow, which does not go beyond reasonable limits and does not shake your faith, teaches me how to love the Most High. But take heart. Anna the prophetess will take care of this flower of David and Aaron. At present, she will be the only lily of David's holy issue present in the temple, and she will be taken care of as if she were a royal pearl. Although we are approaching the time when the Messiah is to come, and the women belonging to the house of David should be anxious to consecrate their daughters to the temple, because the Messiah will be born of a virgin of David's line. Yet, because so many are weakening in their faith, the places of the virgins in the temple are empty. The virgins are all too few, and none of them are royal offspring, since Sarah of Elisha left 3 years ago to get married. It is true, there are still 30 years to the appointed time, but, well, let us hope that Mary will be the first of many virgins of David's house to take her place before the sacred veil. And then, who knows? Zacharias does not say anything else, but he looks at Mary thoughtfully. And then he resumes, "And I too will watch over her. I am a priest, and I have power in here, and I will make use of it for this sweet angel. And Elizabeth also will come to visit her often. Oh, certainly. I'm in such need of God that I'll come and tell this little girl all of my troubles, so that she may tell them to the Eternal One." Anne has taken heart again. To relieve her anxiety even more, Elizabeth asks her, "Oh, Anne, isn't this your wedding veil? Or have you been weaving new sea silk?" "It is. I'm consecrating it to the Lord along with her. My eyes are no longer so good, and also our wealth has melted away in taxes and misfortunes. I couldn't afford heavy expenses. I've only been able to see to her clothing for the time she will be in the house of the Lord. Afterwards, I just don't think that I shall be there to dress her for her wedding. But I want it to be the hands of her mummy, even if they're cold and motionless, which prepared her for her wedding, and wove her linens and veil and dress. Oh, Anne, why think of that? I'm old, my dear cousin, and I have never felt it so much as I do now in this great pain. I've given the last ounce of strength in my life to this flower, to bear this fruit and nourish her. And now the pain of losing her is drawing my last strength away and spilling it forth. Don't say that, for Joachim's sake. Yes, you are quite right. I will try and live for my husband. Joachim pretends that he hasn't heard, intent as he is on listening to Zacharias. But he has heard, and he sighs deeply, his eyes shining with fresh tears. It's between the 3rd and the 6th hour, almost noon. I think we ought to go, Zacharias says. They all get up to put on their mantles, and they prepare to set off. But before going out, Mary kneels down on the stones of the threshold with her arms stretched out, a little pleading cherub. Father, Mother, please give me your blessing. She isn't crying, the brave little girl, but her lips are trembling, and her voice, broken by a sob, resembles more than ever the warbling cooing of a little dove. Her face is pale, and her eyes have the look of resigned distress which I will see again on Calvary and in the sepulchre, where it was so much more intense, so heavy that it was impossible to look upon her without sharing in her deep suffering. Her parents bless her, and they kiss her. Once, twice, a dozen times, they are never satisfied. Elizabeth is weeping, and Zacharias, notwithstanding his efforts to conceal his tears, is also deeply moved. They go out. Mary walks between her father and mother, as before. Zacharias and his wife proceed in front of them, very slowly leading the way. And now they are inside the walls of the temple enclosure. I will go to the high priest. You go and wait for us at the great terrace. They go across 3 yards and through 3 great halls set one upon the other. Finally, they arrive at the foot of the temple proper, a massive gleaming marble cube crowned with gold. Every dome, full and round like a huge half-orange, blazes in the sun, which now at midday is shining down directly into the large yard which surrounds the solemn building. The bright sunlight fills the whole square with its dazzling beams as it dances and sparkles and gleams upon the wide flight of steps that lead up to the temple's shining doors. Only the porch facing the steps along the facade is in shadow, and the very tall bronze and golden doors are even darker and more solemn looking, set out against so much light. Mary looks whiter than snow as she stands in so much sunshine. She pauses now at the foot of the steps between her father and her mother. How hard their hearts must be beating. Elizabeth is beside Anne, but a little behind her, about half a step. At the blare of silver trumpets, the magnificent doors rotate on their hinges, which seem to sing with the voices of lutes and harps while turning smoothly on their bronze ball bearings. The halls and gateways leading towards the temple's interior rooms appear, with their lamps shining like stars in the darkness. Their light falls upon a procession which is steadily moving, drawing closer towards the now open doors. a stately procession, accompanied by silver trumpets, clouds of incense, and lights. It has now arrived at the threshold. Last in the line is the high priest himself, a stately older man dressed in fine white linen and wearing over his linen robe a short linen tunic, and over the top of that, a kind of chasuble, a multicolored garment that's something between a priest's chasuble and a deacon's vestment. It's purple and gold, violet and white strands alternate and sparkle like gems in the sun. And 2 real gems are shining even more brightly on top of his shoulders. Maybe these are buckles beautifully adorned with such precious settings. On his breast, there's a large metal plate shining with gems and held by golden chains. Pendants and fringes gleam on the hem of his short tunic, and gold shines above his forehead on his mitre. A mitre that reminds me of the mitres worn by Orthodox priests, a mitre shaped like a dome instead of being pointed like the Roman ones. The solemn high priest advances forward, unaccompanied, as far as the top of the steps. He stands in the golden sunshine, and that light makes him look even more splendid. The others stand waiting under the shady porch, arranged in a half circle outside the open doors. On the left, there's a group of girls all dressed in white, with the prophetess Anna and other elderly ladies with them, obviously their teachers. The high priest looks at the little girl and smiles approvingly. She must look so very tiny from his position, standing as she is at the foot of a flight of steps that would be worthy of an Egyptian pyramid. He lifts his arms to the sky in prayer. Everyone bows their heads in profound humility before the display of this priestly majesty communicating with the eternal majesty. Then he beckons to Mary, and she departs from her father and her mother, and as if fascinated, she climbs the steps one by one, and she smiles. She smiles in the shade of the temple, where deep within, unseen, the precious veil is hanging. And beyond that, she is now at the top of the steps, at the feet of the high priest, who lays his hand upon her head. The victim has been accepted. And what purer victim had the temple ever received? Then he turns around, and holding his hand on her shoulder, as if he were leading the immaculate little lamb to the altar, he guides her to the temple doors. Before admitting her, he asks her, "Mary of David, are you aware of your vow?" When she replies, "Yes," in her silvery voice, he calls out, "Come in then. Walk in my presence and be perfect." Mary enters and is swallowed up by the darkness within. The group of virgins and teachers and then the Levites hide and obscure her more and more until she can no longer be seen, even as, yes, the great doors are now closing on their sweet-sounding hinges. Through the gap, which is becoming narrower and narrower, the procession can be seen gliding away, advancing toward the Holy of Holies. And now that gap is only a thread. And now it is no more. It's closed. The last chord of the harmonious hinges is greeted by a sob from the 2 old parents and by their joint cry, "Mary, daughter!" And then 2 groans, the one invoking the other, "Anne, Joachim!" Yet leaning upon each other for strength, they finish their offering to its end. They make their sacrifice complete. They fulfill their vow as they whisper, "Let us give glory to the Lord, who is receiving her into his house and is leading her along his path. And with this vision ends. Jesus says, "The high priest had greeted my mother, calling out, 'Walk in my presence and be perfect.' But in so saying, he did not know that he was speaking to the woman who is inferior in perfection only to God. However, he was speaking in the name of God, and therefore his order was a sacred one. Such a command is always sacred, and particularly so when spoken with regards to this virgin, the virgin full of wisdom. Mary had deserved that wisdom should precede her and reveal himself to her first, because from the beginning of her days she had watched at his door, and wishing to be taught out of love, she wanted to be and remain pure, in order to achieve perfect love, and thereby merit to have wisdom as her teacher. In her profound humility, she did not know that she possessed wisdom before being born, and that her union with wisdom was but the continuation of the divine emanations of paradise. She could not even imagine that. And whenever God whispered sublime words to her in the depths of her heart, in her humility, she considered them to be thoughts of pride, and raising her innocent heart to God, she besought him, pleading, "O Lord, have mercy on your servant." Oh, it is true that this truly wise virgin, the eternal virgin, has had only one thought, one sole desire from the dawning of her days: to raise her heart to God from the morning of her life, and to watch and wait for the Lord, praying before the Most High, asking forgiveness for the weaknesses of her heart, as her humility convinced her that there must be. Yet in so doing, she was not aware that she was anticipating the request of forgiveness for sinners, which she would later make at the foot of the cross, together with her dying Son. When the great Lord will decide, she will be filled with the spirit of intelligence, and she will then understand her great mission. For the time being, she's still yet a precious child, who in the sacred peace of the temple establishes and reestablishes closer and closer connections, affections, and memories with her God. This is for everyone. But as for you, my little Maria Valtorta, and all of you who rejoice now in her works, has your teacher nothing special to tell you? Yes, indeed. Walk in my presence and be therefore perfect. I am slightly modifying the sacred phrase, and I am giving it to you as an order, a command that, coming from my lips and my mind, from my heart and my wounds, from my divinity and my glorified, deified humanity, bears with it all the graces that you will need to keep such a heavenly mandate. Yes, I give you my law of love, and I promise you my help in fulfilling this sacred decree. So truly, walk in my presence and be therefore perfect. Be perfect in love, perfect in generosity, perfect in suffering. Look once again at Mother, and consider what so many ignore or wish to ignore, because sorrow is too irksome and inconvenient to their taste and their spirit. Yes, sorrow. Mary suffered from the first hour of her life. To be perfect as she was implied the possession of a perfect sensitivity. So consequently, her experience of sacrifice was to be more piercing and thus more meritorious. The one who possesses purity possesses love. Those who possess love possess wisdom, and those who possess wisdom possess generosity and heroism, because they know why they make their sacrifice. So raise your spirit, even if the cross bends you, breaks you, and kills you. God is with you always, always. I am Emmanuel.